Hello, how are you doing today? Thank you for listening to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk. I've been making music as AfroDJMac. I'm an Ableton certified trainer, musician, producer, lover of sound design. And today's episode, I'm going to talk to you about some lessons I learned from two books I recently read. Okay, I listened to them as audiobooks, but still, I think there's some valuable lessons that I'd love to talk to you about and connect with our music production practice. Before we get to that, though, I'd like to talk about our sponsor, which is Synth Brass, an Ableton Live pack I just created. Synth Brass is a collection of 32 instrument racks for Ableton Live that I made by programming synthesized brass sounds on my Prophet 6 analog synthesizer. I love those kinds of sounds, synth brass sounds. You should be hearing the music right behind this right now that I made using the pack. And it's basically a warm, vintagey kind of pack that I think sounds really cool. There's some nice audio effects on there that you can use on different sounds as well. You can get Synth Brass by heading to the AfroDJMac store, afrodjmac.com/store. Or if you're a member of the AfroDJMac Music Production Club, it is the September download, so you should already have it. So if you are in the club during the month of September 2018, you already got Synth Brass, and I hope you are enjoying it. So thanks. Check out Synth Brass. The two books that I'd like to talk about today are Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell and The Practicing Mind by Thomas Sterner. And I'm going to kind of talk about them together because I think there's a lot of overlap in what we can learn from them. And rather than make two different episodes, I'd like to bring it all together because these are concepts that I think I personally try to work on a lot and have challenges doing so. But they apply not just to our music production, but to life as well. And we'll talk a lot about how it relates to music production. But I thought I'd start first with Outliers, even though that's the one I read second. I think it kind of brings us into the practicing mind a little bit. So Outliers is a pretty popular book by Malcolm Gladwell. Maybe you've read it before, maybe you've heard about it, but it gets passed around a lot in a lot of different circles. And probably one of the things that's most popular, one of the concepts you probably have heard of, is the idea of 10,000 hours to reach mastery at something. So they say if you want to become a master at something, you have to spend 10,000 hours doing it. And that equates to about 10 years of 40 hours a week of work. It's a long time, 10,000 hours. And I think that it's not just putting in time, but it's also like kind of focused, deliberate time where you're really trying to grow and work. You're not just going through the motions. You're actually trying to actively improve and paying attention to your progress as you go along. So if you haven't mastered music production, maybe you still have a little ways to go, which probably many of us do. I kind of like this idea that we don't ever reach mastery. There's no such thing as being a master, because that kind of keeps me in this mindset of learning and growing. And I think that's true, especially with something like music production where technologies change, genres change, musical trends and popular ideas all change very often. It's really hard to become a master where you've got it all figured out. And I think when you get that attitude, that's when you kind of dry up and you don't really grow anymore. So it's important, I think, to kind of feel like you're always chasing the 10,000 hours, even if you're well beyond it. One of the real cores of this book, Outliers, is that we really place, as a society, we place a little too much credit or value on the idea of talent or genius or being gifted. We kind of have this idea that certain people were meant to do something. It was their calling. They were struck by a lightning bolt, or they were born with some special ability. And it's true, I guess, to an extent that we each sort of have our own talents and our own natural strengths and things that we have that make us perhaps predisposed to certain activities. And I think when you look at something like being an athlete, Natural abilities, just physically are often a big part of, what makes you good at something. I mean, you're not going to be an NFL lineman if you're small and light, like that job just requires a massive person. So you kind of need that too. But the idea that is really, to me, honestly encouraging is that if we're able to put in the hard work and the time, we will really outpace the natural gifts and talents that we tend to value so much. So we might think of people as being a prodigy or a gifted person. And while that may be true to an extent, a lot of this really comes from putting in the time. And that's one thing the book really does a nice job of breaking down. It goes through a lot of different examples of people that we might think of as prodigies and natural talents, and shows how really what they are is a person that had the opportunity to put in these 10,000 hours, to put in a tremendous amount of time and effort working on the thing it is that they do. To give you an idea just of one of the particular things that came up, Malcolm Gladwell talks about Bill Gates, and we think of him as kind of like this genius who, computer programmer and software developer. But he had a unique opportunity that most people didn't have. In fact, he's probably one of a very small handful of people that had access to a computer at the time when many people didn't. And he was born at just the right time. Everything kind of fell into place. Outliers really stresses the fact that our upbringing, our situation, our time that we were born, the place we grew up in, all of these things are a major factor in our ability to become outliers in a field, to be someone that stands out. We really rely on the opportunities to do the work. That's really, I guess, a good way to put it. The people that become the outliers and can put in the 10,000 hours have the opportunity to do so. Bill Gates is an interesting example because if he was born a few years later or earlier, he might not have had those same opportunities. He just happened to be the right age and the right stage in his life where he was able to dedicate his life to this kind of stuff. And, you can listen to the book to get the specifics of it. I certainly didn't memorize them all, but the point is clear that our opportunities in life are really important, and we have to recognize those and realize when we're getting them and when we have a chance, and we have to seize them. We have to jump on them when they show up. And we all have our own unique set of opportunities, our own backgrounds, our own places we live with, surrounding people, and whether they're supportive or not supportive, or whether they're involved in something we're interested in or not, they can be the very thing that helps us get to that opportunity to put in the 10,000 hours. Part of what is discussed a lot in the book is that we don't make it alone ever. What we really need are people in our lives that allow us the chance to do the things that we do, that are supportive of our work, or at the very least motivate us enough to want to do the work. That's a really big part of it. And I think it's okay to think about that in terms of music, and that you need to find the right people to be around, to share ideas with, to make music with. That's a really big part of the whole journey. I think about my life and the fact that I am lucky enough to have been surrounded by friends and people that were into music, that showed it to me, that get me interested into it. At the same time, I was also not really exposed to this at a very young age. And I see that, or, I don't have a choice, so I've decided to see this as an advantage. I didn't get involved in school band. I didn't get involved in playing an instrument, in that kind of formal setting, reading music, and sort of maybe putting the education of music into the way I see it, if that makes sense, the formal education. I was lucky enough to find music through friends and discover it and learn about it through playing and feeling it and just dissecting the music that I love to listen to. And while there may have been some important theory that would have been very helpful, especially early on, I think the fact that I didn't have it allowed me to learn and discover things for myself. And I've always found that really interesting. And it's part of where I've wound up with music these days, is that discovery place. That's one of the things I really love about music and sound, is finding new things and seeing what I can do with it. Perhaps if the path was a little bit different for me, I might not have wound up here. If I'd never had the friends that turned me on to music, if I would have maybe been someone that took piano lessons at 4 years old and hated it and never wanted to play the piano again, you never know. Outliers does a really nice job in showing how the pieces sort of fall in place for the people that are able to find the time to work so hard on their craft. And I think that we can also say that the pieces not falling into place can also be an advantage too. And I take that kind of from my own experience. And I think it's a nice way to think about when things don't go right, in that it's an opportunity to try something different, to move in another direction. It's a really great book. I definitely recommend people read it or listen to it as I did, and just take it in. It's incredibly inspiring and motivating, but at its heart is the concept of putting in the hard work. And it says, we might have a little bit of talent or intelligence or natural ability, and we also definitely need to rely on the opportunity and our surroundings and our environment. But the thing that trumps it all is putting in the time. So there's some really great examples of how intelligence, for instance, is necessary to do a lot of things, but more intelligence after a while doesn't mean more results. So there's sort of like this threshold that Gladwell talks a lot about. Once we reach a certain threshold, then the deciding factor is just the time people put in. So it doesn't mean if your IQ is higher, you're just going to get better results. It's not. It doesn't really pay off that much after a certain point. The thing that makes the difference is putting in the time and work and the effort. And I find that really encouraging, because while some of these things are out of our control, that's something that's not out of our control. Putting in the time, the work, the effort, pushing yourself, showing up every day, that's something you can control. And that's something we can focus on. And it's also kind of where I think we can make the jump to the other book, The Practicing Mind. So yeah, definitely check out Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And another great book was The Practicing Mind by Thomas Sterner. And The Practicing Mind has to do with this concept of focusing on practicing and making practice a part of your day, your life, and to really realize that we're always practicing. I kind of like to joke around with my students, sometimes my younger students, in that, one of the funny things about growing up is when you realize that all the people that have told you what to do your whole life are just people. They don't have the answers. They don't have the manual. They don't have the roadmap. They're just winging it. They're just doing whatever they think is right. They don't know if everything they do is the right way to do things, but that's just the way people are. We don't really know the right way to live. We're just doing the best we can with what we've learned and what we've picked up from other people. But there's really no right way to do things. We're all just kind of winging it. And what The Practicing Mind talks about is how our life is just a practice. We're constantly practicing everything. And it sort of puts down goals a little bit in saying how, while goals are great, I guess, you need them, we tend to see them more as the destination. And Sterner kind of reframes the idea of a goal as more like a steering wheel. It's the thing that gives you guidance. It's more like a compass. It shows us where to go and how to practice. And I really like that a lot, because sometimes your goals change. And if you have it in your head that the goal is the main thing, when you decide to change your goals, well, for one, you might not want to change your goals at all because you've decided this is what I'm going to accomplish. But two, you can adjust. You can change your practice a little bit. You can kind of, turn the ship a small degree, which over time will take you in a totally different place. The goal can also be a distraction, and it can be the thing that gets in our way. And I think this is pretty interesting when you are practicing, when you're working at something and trying to get better. We need to be in the moment, right? We need to be enjoying it. We don't want to be stressing through it and hating it and being frustrated the whole time. And the way to not get that way is to just be in the moment, to just focus on what you're doing. But what can inevitably happen to us is while we're practicing, we think about our goal and we think about getting there. And then we realize how far away we are and how much work we still have to do. And it seems like we can never really get there. And that's taking us out of the moment. We're no longer, let's say we're practicing on guitar, we're no longer just going through the exercises. Now we're thinking about how far we have to go. We're out of the now and we're in the future, or the future that seems like it'll never get here, which is even worse. And that can lead us to being frustrated, and we start procrastinating. We avoid the work because the goal seems so far off. We're never going to get there. So one thing I really got out of the practicing mind was to see your goal more as a tool to guide your practice. And this sort of comes up in Outliers, and I've seen it come up in other books that I've enjoyed. In particular, I'm thinking of Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art, in which you have to focus on the things you can control. And when we focus on the results or the end game, that's kind of a recipe for failure, because we can't control the results. We can't control the end game. We can't control what people are going to think of what we do, or how successful something will be, or how many people will buy our albums, or whatever you want to think about. We don't have that control. The only thing we have control over is putting in the work and the time and the practice. The practicing mind really wants you to think about just enjoying the practice. And when you can get to the place where the actual just practice of going through things is fun and is a reward in of itself, then the results will come. And you might not get the results you were expecting, and different things might happen, but you're getting there because you're doing the practice. It's a focus on the process type of thing and not the product. Enjoying the process and seeing where it takes you. I think that's an important thing to have in your music production, because if we focus too much on the end game, we might not seize interesting opportunities when they come up. Seizing opportunities, that's an Outliers thing. We might not try out something new because we know where we have to get. We're not going to experiment. We're not going to have fun. We're not going to take chances because we have this predetermined place we need to wind up. But if we can see it as more enjoying the process and the practice, then I think we get into a validation of these explorations and experimentations. You have to embrace the challenge. You have to realize that the challenge is the very thing that is going to give you growth. And when things do get tough in your practice, when you're facing something that's really hard, you know that that's going to only make you better the next day and stronger and more resilient. You'll be able to bounce back faster. If we practice in a way that's not challenging ourselves, we get no growth. If you make a comparison to exercise, for instance, if you lift a 4-ounce weight, if you're going to bench press 4 pounds 10,000 times, you're really not going to get very far. You may get like repetitive joint injuries or something, repetitive motion injuries, but you're not going to grow. There's no challenge there. You'd be much better off spending a shorter amount of time really pushing yourself. And that's part of the practice too, is when it is hard, to reframe it in your head as, rather than being frustrating or making you angry or focusing on the goal and realizing you're so far off because you can't get through just this practice. Rather, see it as a chance for growth, that you are hitting a wall and this is a limit you have. And that if you keep pushing up against that limit, soon you'll be able to get past it. But when we get to those hard points, that's almost a time to celebrate. When we hit failure, it's almost a time to enjoy it, because here we are. We've found where our limits are, and now we know what we need to push through and break past. So I really love that concept, and I think it applies to everything again, everything in life. The point is to be in the now and to enjoy the moment for what it is. And sometimes the goal takes us out of the now and distracts us and makes us frustrated. And we have to realize when we get to that point that we're actually hitting a wall that we can now learn to overcome. Now, I'm not saying I've figured this all out just because I read the book, but it's definitely been something that I can run through my brain a little bit when I get in those moments, when I'm frustrated, when I'm tired, when I don't want to do something. I can push myself and know that I'm going to come out on the other end a little better than I was before. And I think the idea of just making a little bit of progress every single day is a really nice way to do things. I mean, we don't see our change over the course of a day. You don't look different in the morning every single day, but over time, when you look at pictures, you see the difference. And that's because every little bit adds up. Just like in our work with music, every little bit of effort is cumulative. It adds up as long as we are consistent, as long as we have the patience and discipline. And one of the points in the book that's kind of funny is that idea that in order to have patience and discipline, you need to have patience and discipline. So in order to be disciplined, you have to use discipline. And it's really challenging. It's this sort of loop that is very hard to get past. I don't know anybody that is very disciplined that would ever say it's easy, because if it was, then where's the discipline? The whole point is that it's something you're constantly working on. It's a practice. It's a little bit like a relationship. You don't just get married and then everything's okay and, you live happily ever after. Although that's what maybe some of the stories will tell us. That's not how it works. It's something you have to constantly attend to and nurture. And it's the same thing with practice, with self-improvement, with your music. You have to constantly work at it. You don't just figure it out. You don't just listen to the book and then you're all good to go. And that's truthfully half the reason I'm talking to you about this right now, is because it's a way for me to get this stuff out, to internalize it, to remind myself that this is a really important thing that I need to do. So I highly recommend both The Practicing Mind by Thomas Sterner and Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. I'm going to put the links in the show notes. What you've heard from me is really just the gist. It's the Cliff's Notes version. It's not the whole story. There's a lot of great details in there. Outliers has a really great part about how failures happen. And it's never really just one thing that goes wrong. It's a culmination of a lot of little things, real small things that we let go. And it's pretty eye-opening. It's a great section of the book that I'll kind of leave for you to explore on your own. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope that you're enjoying the podcast as much as I am doing it. Part of the thing I'm getting out of it is something I did mention, just this time to sort of reflect on the things I'm doing and the stuff I'm taking in and try to articulate it as clearly as I can to you. But by talking, by going over these things in our head and even trying to put it into words, I think we do a lot for developing our understanding of things. And I encourage you to get the conversation going with the people in your community, the people that you share these passions with that you're working on, whether it's music production or something else, to just talk about the process. So valuable. And Practicing Mind is definitely a lot about the process and enjoying the process. If this was easy, why would we do it? Who cares? It wouldn't be fun. The challenge is the thing that makes it enjoyable. So we have to remember to embrace that even when the challenge is, or especially when the challenge is really hard, because that's where the growth happens. That's where the change happens. That's where we get answers to really difficult questions and problems. Thanks so much for listening. This is Brian Funk. This is the Music Production Podcast. Tune in next time, and I appreciate your time. Take care.